It is often said that travel can be the best way to break free from routine, to see new places, meet new people, and experience the thrill of the unknown. But not every journey is a thrilling adventure. Sometimes, travel feels like a never-ending paid of monotonous the landscapes, and overwhelming boredom, and I had a distinct pleasure of experiencing one of those journeys. It all started on a chilly Tuesday morning when I was assigned to attend a conference in a remote town. A place so small that it barely showed up on most maps. The conference was supposed to be a big deal, with networking opportunities, brilliant minds, and groundbreaking discussions. However, from the moment I left my house, I had an unsettling feeling that this trip wasn't going to be as glamorous as it was made out to be. The journey began with a bus ride to the airport. At first, it wasn't too bad. The sky was overcast, and I was heavily excited to get away from my usual routine, thinking this would be a good change. However, my optimism soon began to fade. The bus was slow, the driver kept making unnecessary stops, and the seats were uncomfortable. I found myself staring out the window, watching the endless stretches of grey highway below. The only thing that broke the silence was the OK channel, hung from another vehicle and the hum of the bus engine. Arriving at the airport didn't help much. I expected a bustling, energetic atmosphere like in the movies, but instead, I found myself trudging through a crowded terminal filled with tired-looking travelers who were clearly in the same mindset as me. They just wanted to get wherever they were going as quickly as possible. The line for security was long, and people around me seemed to share my disdain for the process. No one was smiling, everyone was simply trying to survive. When I finally boarded the plane, I was hoping for a brief respite from the dreariness. But my seat was cramped, the air was too dry, and the food was unappetizing at best. I flipped through the in-flight magazine, hoping to distract myself, but every page felt like the same recycled information about luxury resorts and overpriced electronics. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, the seatbelt sign in head or the flight attendants came through with their style of insap pretzels and bad coffee. The flight felt endless. I stared at the back of the seat in front of me for hours, wondering how much longer I would have to endure this miserable, cramped experience. Time seemed to stretch, and that was blended together like some cruel experiment in how long a peasant could endure pure boredom. The only thing that kept me somewhat sane was the thought that the destination, though remote, would at least be a place where I could stretch my legs and regain some sense of freedom. But when we finally landed, I quickly realized that the journey was far from over. The town I arrived in was as uninspiring as its description. It was a place surrounded by endless stretches of farmland, flat roads, and a few scattered buildings. The conference center was located on the outskirts of the town, which meant I had to take another bus to get there. This was the part of the trip that truly sealed the deal. The bus ride was agonizingly long, and the landscape outside never changed. It was just endless fields and the occasional farmhouse. Nothing to see, nothing to do, just the hum of the engine and the soft, distant sound of someone snoring. When I finally arrived at the conference center, I felt a little more optimistic. After all, the conference was the reason I was there. But as I walked through the doors, the sterile conference hall smell hit me, a mixture of stale coffee, hotel, carpet, and mild disinfectant. The rooms were cold and lacked personality. The people inside were polite, but in a stiff, corporate way that made me feel like I was in a business simulation rather than an exciting learning experience. The first few hours of the conference were a blur of uninspired presentations. The speakers were knowledgeable, but their topics seemed to drag on and on, with slide after slide of data that I could barely stay awake for. The attendees were polite, nodding at the appropriate moments, but it was clear that no one was really interested in the discussions. There was a lot of fake enthusiasm, mixed as professionalism. But beneath the surface, everyone seemed to be mentally counting the minutes until they could leave. During the lunch break, I found myself sitting alone at a table, picking at a salad that tasted like it had been prepared days ago. I watched as people around me exchange pleasantries about business and small talk about their flights, but the conversation felt so forced. I started to feel the weight of how disconnected everyone was. Like we were all just trying to get through the day without actually engaging in anything meaningful. The rest of the conference was a repeat of the same, more presentations, more poorly catered food, and more small talk. At one point, I tried to leave the venue for a walk, hoping to clear my head, but the weather had taken a turn for the west. The wind picked up and it started to drizzle, so I huddled down the dining, wishing that I could just skip ahead to the park where I could go home. By the end of the conference, I was exhausted not physically, but mentally. The whole thing felt like one big blab boredom, and they couldn't wait to get back to the airport. But the journey home was just as painful as the wonder. The same bus ride, the same crowd at the airport, and another flight filled with discomfort and tedium. The only difference was that this time I knew exactly how long I had to endure it, I arrived home, feeling drained and unfulfilled. The entire trip had been a waste of time, or so I thought. But as I sat in my own bed at night, reflecting on the journey, I couldn't help but laugh at how absurd it all was. It wasn't a life-changing experience, nor was it a trip full of adventure and excitement. But sometimes, the most memorable journeys are the ones that remind you how much you appreciate the familiar, the comfortable, and the simple pleasures of home. In the end, I realized that not every journey has to be extraordinary. Some are just a series of long delays that we have to get through. And though it may not be the kind of trip you tell stories about, it is the one that teaches you how to endure, how to appreciate small moments, and how to make the most of the mundane. Conclusion: finding humor in the boring looking back. The trip was as dreadful as I initially thought. Sure, it was long, boring, and uncomfortable, but it also gave me a fresh perspective on the value of comfort, routine, and the simple joys of everyday life. Not every journey has to be extraordinary to be meaningful. Some are just reminders that, even in the dullest moments, there is always something to learn, even if it is just how to live it up sedati habitual. A dull and endless journey continued, visiting the conference laptop, I felt like I had been on autopilot for days. I had attended every session, nodded along during every presentation, and smiled at every person I met. But none of it felt genuine. The entire trip had been a blend of hotel rooms and remarkable meals. And I spent on transportation that seemed to stretch endlessly. I began to wonder if I had made a terrible mistake by signing up for this conference in the first place. What was the point of all this? Why did I travel so far just to be bored out of my mind? The flight back was just as bad, if not worse. The excitement of leaving the conference behind quickly faded as soon as I entered the airport. The overhead announcements, the endless lines at security, and the robotic voices of flight attendants only added to the dreariness. I found my seat in the plane and sank into it with a sigh, the weight of the trip pressing down on me. This time, I didn't even bother trying to sleep. I stared out the small window, watching the clouds build or shift and change, yet nothing seemed to capture my attention. The flight attendants made their rounds, offering more stales next, and the woman sitting beside me started a conversation. But I barely registered her words. My mind kept drifting to thoughts of what I could be doing back home, or how much I had missed during these past few days. As the plane started its descent, I looked out at the city skyline below. Still as unimpressive as the fields I had seen. On the way to the conference, there was a strange sense of anticlimax. I had traveled all this way, endured the endless hours of dullness, and what did I have to show for it? A few business cards and Azteca brochures that I would probably never look at again. I finally landed and made my way through the same endless lines at baggage claim, and as I stepped out of the airport and into the familiar embrace of the city, it felt like I had come back from a long, tiresome dream. Everything felt so normal, so ordinary, and I was glad to be back in my routine. But it is when it hit me, this was the point of the journey, or rather, the point of any journey. The trip was a reminder that not everything in life has to be exciting, glamorous, or groundbreaking. Sometimes, the best experiences come from the most mundane and dull moments. The return to reality, appreciating the familiar the next few days after the trip, I found myself